XDiavel Xperience this weekend, and unfortunately I lost my XDiavel S test ride. I also rode the base, so I will have some footage with vlog voiceover, but the first test ride that I did, where I was super excited, very impressed, and shocked at how well the bike handled, how well the suspension took care of bumps. Basically all the questions I had about the bike and all the doubts I had were completely answered to the affirmative. I was just blown away. And honestly, if I wasn't looking to buy a house this year, I would have been asking them, hey, how much can I get in trade for my Carbon? I mean, my Carbon's a great bike, and I really enjoy riding it. It's really fun. But comparing those two bikes back to back for my riding style, the XDiavel is amazing. If you are more in the traditional cruiser side of things, and you're not so into the Street Fighter, naked, standard, sport bike side, then I think the XDiavel would be an amazing option if you can swing the cash. So let me lay out the reasons why I think it's such a great bike. For one, it's one of those God is in the details works of art of motorcycle ingenuity when you sit down and take in all of the little details that they took the time to cover. It's clear that they listened to Diavel Owner feedback and answered many, many concerns about maintenance annoyances, disassembly annoyances, like the fact that you can just take the seat off, unbolt the rear tank mount, and boom, the tank's off. You can access the airbox, you can access the engine, the ABS unit's probably on top of the airbox like my Diavel. That alone is a godsend compared to the disassembly for my Carbon. There's just so much stuff to take off, but you rarely do it though. So it's really honestly a minor complaint, but it's one of those cool things that they simplified and streamlined the bike. It is much narrower. It is a very slim and what I call svelte bike. It is literally the definition of svelte. Slim and sexy, totally trimmed down, no extra BS. The tank shape is nice. It doesn't come up really high, so if you ever did get into an accident, you're probably not going to bust your pelvis on it, because it has that traditional cruiser slope up, rather than the sport bike gigantic camel hump that you will crush your pelvis into and end up in the hospital for a couple weeks, like a good friend of mine who crashed her street triple. Somebody pulled out in front of her, and yeah, sure enough, that's exactly what happened. So tank shape is nice, the body shape is nice. The concerns about the tail, yeah, the tail's small, but if you look at the photos with the included grab rail / backrest, they've got this nice, clean, low backrest and grab rail combo that actually looks like it gives a few inches off the back of the bike for people who are, let's say, more graciously endowed in the hind section. And unless you're pushing 200 plus, you're probably not going to have issues fitting on the back of the XDiavel. Now, comfort-wise, there's going to be seat options. There's also going to be probably a lot of aftermarket seat options for this bike. Within a few years, we'll probably also see lots of luggage options because it's a much more traditional cruiser. Now, with that said, it breaks a lot of traditions. It has a lot of electronics, and honestly, the way that they have done the electronics on this bike and where they've put the tack, it is not obtrusive whatsoever. Like, you do not feel the, unless you're riding hard, you will not feel the traction control kick in. You will not feel the ABS ABS kick in, you honestly, like on my Diavel, you honestly have to death grip the bars to get that front tire to lock up, unless you're on really loose traction or really loose surface. And then if you are on a loose surface, that's exactly what you want. You want ABS to kick in and stutter the front to keep grip. Otherwise, you're going down. And the way that they have done the ABS and traction control on this bike is phenomenal. The ABS is the same that's on the Diavel, on my bike, the Diavel Carbon, and the traction control is actually improved. They added, I think it's like cornering traction control, so you can be leaned over in a corner, hammer on, oh no, mid-corner ABS, so you could be mid-corner, hammer on the front brake, and it's not going to throw the front end out on you. That is amazing. That's a godsend. When you've got that as a safety net to catch you at your most extreme moments of you're just railing through a canyon and all of a sudden there's a wet spot or some gravel or sand or who knows what, oil. I mean, there have been times when people have dumped oil on the roads up in the canyons just to be absolute punks. So it's nice to have that extra little safety net. And you know what? You can turn it off if you don't want it. So it's really just a fantastic feature that they've been building into their new bikes. And I'm pleased. Like, it works great on my Diavel when I'm ripping through the canyons. And I have it set to touring, which is traction control level 3. I'll be just railing through a corner, not even feel the traction control kicking on, but I'll see the light flickering, meaning that that rear tire is slipping a bit, and the traction control is doing its job. It's keeping the bike in line, and I can just go full Hoontown mode on the Snake or other roads and not have to worry so much about stuff kicking out. Now, the time that I did get that crazy wobble, I think I had it set to, yeah, it was set to touring, but I really, I suddenly tried to ham-fist it coming out of a corner, and that's what caused it to kick, but it saved it. Like, when the tire kicked out, the traction control kicked on, cut the throttle, and that's, I don't know if I could have saved it in that situation. I might have just flipped the rear end out. So the aids that are on the XDiavel will be phenomenal, and it's one of those things where you might not notice it, but when it does kick in and saves you, you'll be sold on the idea. So there's that. The high beam, they changed it so you bump it out with your finger. That is honestly the only little complaint I had about the bike, aside from really low RPM bogging. But when I say really low, I say 2,000 RPM, which is practically idle for this bike. And even my Diavel does not like 2,000 RPM up a hill on the throttle. It's like if you're on flat ground or going downhill, yeah, you can coast in 2, but if you're trying to accelerate at 2,000 RPM, you're going to want to slip the clutch a little bit or give it a bit more gas and be down a gear. So first gear takeoffs were a little weird because the power band is a bit different than my Diavel. But mine has aftermarket tuning on it. It's really, really aggressively tuned and probably running richer than normal. So, but yeah, I was just blown away. Like everything they've added. They've got cruise control on the XDiavel. There's even a little warning. If your kickstand is down, there's a little warning on your tack that says, hey, your kickstand's down. The bike's not going to start unless you kick it up if you're in first. It's like, as you'll hear later, the Bluetooth, it doesn't deal with all the text messages and stuff. It's more exporting the controls for, say, like a Senna, so you don't have to reach up and mess with your helmet. You can just keep your hand on the bar and bump the rocker switches to change songs, change volume. You can just navigate through the menus, and that system sounds like it'll be really cool. The switch gears on the right-hand side are interesting. The kill switch doesn't completely cover the starter switch, but then there's a bottom switch underneath that is the on-off switch for the bike. So we now have a separate button. You don't have to push and hold down like on the Diavel, which is a little weird for some owners. I've gotten used to it. It's nice to have a totally separate switch, so if anything goes wrong, you're just replacing one switch per component, and you're not getting as much use and wear on one switch when you're using the two separate switches, so that's kind of cool. And I think that switch is also what you use to lock the bike because it has a lock symbol on it. What else? The stock mirrors on the S were fantastic. I don't know if those were DP performance options or if that's something that comes uprated on the S, but they're these really nice, almost like a Rizoma, machined black anodized mirrors that were perfect. I had an amazing view out of the rear, and of course you won't be able to hear that in the video, but yeah, the rear view was fantastic. The mirrors on the base were more like the standard Diavel. They're that huge teardrop, and they're not so great. It's weird how I think the S mirrors were like slightly convex to make them, to give them such a good viewing angle. But the base mirrors, they do look nice, but they're pretty much the same mirrors that are on the base carbon. What else? It's a stainless steel gas tank, so you can't use a magnetic tank bag, but you're not going to have to worry about rust. It's a trade-off. I like that it's stainless because ease of maintenance, you could strip it down, repaint it, and not have to worry about, oops, I got a little mist spot, oh, now it's going to rust. Oh, perfect. There's not a lot of carbon stuff on it, but it's a pretty understated bike when you look at it at a distance. I did get to see the Roland Sands bike, and oh my god. Carbon everywhere, gorgeous, gorgeous Termignoni system on it, and he did a custom job on it. I'll show some of those pictures. It just, with all the RSD accessories are definitely very cool for this bike, and people are going to be hard-pressed not to throw extra cash at their base or S to add those on. Honestly though, if you're going base, you're only missing out on the Bluetooth, and the rest is mostly aesthetic, so you might not want the Roland Sands stuff because it's got the machined silver bits, and the base is very blackout, flat and everything. But for the S model, man, the Roland Sands stuff just looks amazing. The fuel cap's really cool. There's just so many little details everywhere. And I'll show those. But yeah, overall, man, I was just blown away. I'm gonna have to go back to SoCal and test ride and try to see if my wife will pick that as her next bike. Because it would be awesome to have that and the Diavel Carbon in the garage. It would just be like the perfect pair. And to hear those two bikes rolling together as a family would be, oh, spine tingling. So I'm working on my wife to say, hey, okay, hey, I know you like sport bikes. I know you like kind of the sport touring deal, but I think you might like the riding position of this better. It's very comfortable. I was very surprised by the forward controls. Usually they feel like a bit of a stretch and kind of awkward, but I was able to pick it up right away. With them adjusted fully back at 5'8", I felt it was about perfect. It was just like my legs, kind of like when you're sitting in a car. You're just kind of, your feet are a little bit forward. Nice gentle bend in your leg. Even with them adjusted all the way forward at 5'8", like it wasn't a big deal. It felt more like my dad's Rocket, which he's like 6'2", and he's got his stuff adjusted way forward. But even with them adjusted all the way forward, it didn't feel bad at all. But personally, I would adjust them all the way back, and I would probably get Rizoma rear sets, which if they offer those, and they use the same mounts, and you can adjust them up, then at that point I would probably use one of the forward mounting positions to keep my foot kind of the same distance as the rear setting, but higher up for ground clearance. I mean, honestly, the ground clearance on this bike, unless you're railing a twisty road, you're not going to be scraping pegs. We didn't scrape pegs at all on the test ride. It was a pretty gentle cruise around neighborhoods and stuff with a few twisty areas, but I would have liked to take it down Mulholland, and if Ducati would like to loan me a bike to do a thorough, exhaustive review, I would love to do that, but But lean angle is not going to be a problem, guys. It's the exhaust, the header is so tucked in, and it's on the left-hand side now, that you would probably be scraping engine and other parts if the controls were off before you started scraping header. So we don't have the mid-pipe concern anymore that we do with current gen Diavel. I mean, I was scraping my header on that the first month I owned the bike, and it really kind of upset me. But I fixed it by modifying the slip fits and everything. I'll have to do a video on that later. But yeah, I mean, aftermarket rear sets, we're going to have options to raise the pegs up, which is instantly going to give us a better lean angle than a stock Diavel, which is 41 degrees. The XDiavel is 40 degrees. So I'm not worried about that. The bike handles amazingly well. It's got a really low center of gravity. I felt that it actually flicks easier than my Diavel. My Diavel feels kind of top heavy, but this, because it's so low, the seat is much lower. It was so much easier just to move around, even at slow speeds. But the main thing I went on the test ride to find out was the suspension. That's the question that I had for all the professional reviewers that went down to San Diego. I was like, what does the suspension do over bumps? And I got a lot of mixed answers. Some were like, oh, it is harsh. I'm like, but what does that mean? What does it feel like? And I didn't get solid answers. So this test ride, the people that I was out riding with, like, we saw speed bumps, and we actually accelerated over the speed bump to see what would happen. And you know what? It sopped up that speed bump like a champ. Yeah, you felt it, meaning you knew that the bump happened, but you didn't feel it jar up your spine like my bike. My bike is super stiff. The previous gen Diavel, especially the first gen Diavel, is very, very stiff. It's practically a track bike or a very, very smooth canyon scraper, hooligan machine, Street Fighter type setup, and does not want to absorb bumps with the stock suspension at all. It's just very harsh, but it has razor agility, and it just rides like it's on rails. Even though it's going over bumps, it rides like it's on rails. Whereas the XDiavel, what they've done with the suspension, initially, because it's got the different settings on the two different fork legs, I thought that was going to be a drop in quality, but I was very pleased. Like, it, even the really rough spots and road transitions where normally I'd be getting jammed in the spine and my back would be killing me, because I do have back issues from sitting at a desk all day, every day for years and years, and not getting, having bad posture, slouching mostly. So, yeah, even over the rough stuff, where I was like, oh man, this is kind of jarring and vibrating me, and hard hits, I would go over those sections and I would start laughing. Like, you'll probably hear me in some of the video. I'll upload the unedited ride, and I just start busting out laughing because there was no pain. The bike did its job, the suspension absorbed all the bumps, and it was just amazing. So yeah, if you're considering the XDiavel as your next bike, yeah, definitely, if you've got the budget for it, go out and get a test ride. If you don't have the budget for it, don't go out and get a test ride, because you'll probably be leaving the dealership with papers in hand, like I did. I was not expecting to buy my Diavel Carbon, and then I test rode it and I was like, oh my god, this thing's amazing.